Hey guys. Happy Friday. Good afternoon. It's great to see so many friendly faces in here. Not that that's different than normal. I'm obviously referring to the children around the room. We're really excited and very glad to welcome the kids of the press corps to the White House today. They're going to love trick-or-treating in the executive office building, and I look forward to taking some questions, maybe even from some of the kids today. A couple of quick things to note before we get into that. As you all saw yesterday, was an important moment for our nation's fight against the drug addiction and opioid epidemic that has hurt so many wonderful families. By directing the declaration of a nationwide public health emergency to address the opioids crisis, the President is mobilizing his entire administration to confront this issue. The President's stirring remarks yesterday, which included a powerful story of how addiction impacted his family, set the stage for the country to unite behind this fight to save lives. In the wake of the announcement, several cabinet members and agency heads are traveling around the country to events related to the opioid crisis. Among those participating in events are Attorney General Sessions, Secretaries Shulkin and Carson, Acting Secretary Hargan, Surgeon General Adams, and Acting ICE Director Homan. These events illustrate that the President truly has made this issue an administration-wide priority. On the economic front, the U.S. economy grew at 3% for the second quarter in a row, despite the damage from this year's hurricane season. Unemployment is at a 16-year low, the stock market continues to climb to record levels, and economic confidence is soaring. The engine of the American economy is revving up, and the President is ready to pour in the rocket fuel through massive tax cuts and reforms. It's fitting that we have some kids with us here today because ultimately this tax plan is about empowering hardworking American families to build a better life for themselves and a brighter future for their children. And with that, I will take your questions. John.
So I want to ask you about the $300 million contract that Whitefish Energy got to do rebuild the electrical grid in Puerto Rico. Does the White House have any concerns about the way this contract came down and the fact that this company has apparently no experience of doing anything on this magnitude?
This is a contract that was determined by the local authorities in Puerto Rico, not something that the federal government played a role in, but as we understand, there's an ongoing audit, and we'll look forward to seeing the results of that later.
Is there red flags raised by this? And can you say definitively that the fact that the primary, one of the primary investors in this company was a major donor to the Trump campaign had nothing to do with the fact this contract was awarded?
Right. The federal government, as I said, has nothing to do with this contract or the process. This was something solely determined by the Puerto Rican government. And as I said, we'll look forward to the audit to see if there are any other issues beyond that. Matthew.
Thanks, Sarah. A question on those Russia sanctions that the President signed in August. So the recipients of those sanctions were supposed to be named on October 1st, and that just came out today. I'm wondering if you can explain the delay and how soon the administration will actually act to implement those sanctions.
Right. There was an interagency review that's now been completed. That was the cause for the delay. The guidance was issued by the State Department, and that's now being carried out. And for any further details, I'd refer you to the State Department. John.
May I kindly request too? The President tweeted out this morning regarding the Russia investigation, quote, after months of costly looking. Is the President suggesting that the Mueller special investigation is a waste of money?
I think that the President's been pretty clear what his position throughout this process. That's not the only investigation that's taken place. Congress has spent a great deal of time on this, a better part of a year. All of your news organizations have actually spent probably a lot of money on this as well, which we would consider probably a pretty big waste. I think that our position hasn't changed since day one, and I think we are seeing now that if there was any collusion with Russia, it was between the DNC and the Clintons, and certainly not our campaign.
Question number two.
Sorry, I'm going to move around. We're going to be on a tight time today.
This is an important one on 401ks.
Well, then maybe one of your colleagues will ask it. Zeke, go ahead.
Begging for two here also. First, if you have any comment on the situation in Catalonia and Spain more broadly, the State Department put out a pretty sharp statement saying the United States wants a unified Spain. Would you echo that from the podium? Has the President made any phone calls on that?
I'm not aware of any phone calls today, but we certainly echo the State Department and again reiterate our support for a unified Spain.
And Sarah, one
Jordan,
more.
sorry guys, I'm going to jump around to
Thanks, Sarah.
try to cover
Whitefish
everybody.
Energy, the president met this morning with Interior Secretary Zinke. He's from the town where that company is based. The president asked him directly whether he had any knowledge of this deal.
The primary purpose for this meeting that has been on the schedule for several weeks was to discuss the Secretary's monuments report that'll be coming out shortly, and that was the reason for the meeting. But he did ask Secretary Zinke just for clarification purposes, and he reiterated once again that we have no role, the federal government, and specifically he had no role in that contract. John?
Thanks a lot, Sarah. On Whitefish Energy, another question on this company. Prior to Hurricane Maria, it just had 2 employees. And then after Hurricane Maria, it's awarded a $300 million plus contract. I realize that you said this was a contract that was awarded by officials in Puerto Rico, but would you acknowledge that doesn't look right just on the surface of things?
Look, I'm not going to comment before the audit is conducted, but we certainly look forward to seeing the results of that. And once again, this was a state and local decision made by the Puerto Rican authorities and not the federal government, but we will look into the audit once it's published.
The president has said there's a lot of corruption in Puerto
I'm gonna-
Rico. Would you think that this falls under that umbrella of corruption?
Once again, I'm not
perhaps?
going to get ahead of the audit, but once we have that, we'll make a determination.
You mentioned the opioid crisis at the beginning of your remarks and how the president yesterday declared it a national public health emergency. That declaration did not come with a request for money from Congress. How much does the president want Congress to put towards this crisis, and when will he put in a formal request for that money?
Well, there was $45 billion that was originally in the health care plan that the president supported that no Democrat in the country supported. So ideally that would have been done through that. But since it wasn't, we're hoping that Congress will come together and there will be a lot of bipartisan support to put behind the opioid crisis and joining the president in dealing with this effort. Major?
Sarah, can we say then, therefore, based on your answer just now, that $45 billion is what you would like to see as an initial approach to the opioid crisis and done during the budget deal that you hope to negotiate in December?
I'm not going to negotiate with you from the podium, but that was the number that we outlined in that initial health care bill. There's $1 billion that's been spent to date since the president came into office. We do feel like that $45 billion would have been a good number that was in the health care bill. That was what we supported. We're going to continue looking at that and determine future numbers as we work on negotiating the next budget.
Is that a good place to start with Congress, though? Is that a good place to start with Congress?
In the meeting that the president had with Secretary Zinke, did he agree with the recommendation to shrink the size of Bears Ears National Monument in Utah?
I'm not going to get ahead of the president's announcement on the specifics of that, but I can tell you that he will be going to Utah in the first part of early December, and we'll release more details at that point, if not some before. He also spoke with both Senators Hatch and Lee during the course of that meeting.
Thanks, Sarah. Obviously, sexual harassment has been in the news. At least 16 women accused the president of sexually harassing them throughout the course of the campaign. Last week, during a press conference in the Rose Garden, the president called these accusations fake news. Is the official White House position that all of these women are lying?
Yeah, we've been clear on that from the beginning, and the president's spoken on it. John?
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Last weekend, former President Jimmy Carter offered his availability as a go-between to the North Korean regime in the hopes of resolving the differences between this country and Pyongyang. He has a history with the family of the current leader in North Korea, meeting with his grandfather in 1994. Is the administration in contact with President Carter, and does it have any plans to use him as a go-between or an envoy to Pyongyang?
I don't think that's part of our process at this time. If that changes, we'll certainly let you know. But that's not part of our current plan or thinking for how to deal with North Korea. Blake?
Sarah, thanks. I'll ask the 401k question.
See, you got friends helping you out.
Helping my colleague.
And you didn't think anybody here liked you, John.
I've got John's back. Is the president considering dropping the amount of pre-tax contributions that Americans can put into their 401k? Currently, that's at about $18,000. It seems as if this whole issue is up for negotiation. Does the president support taking that $18,000 or so level and potentially lowering that?
As I said earlier this week, the president wants to continue to fight and push for protection of Americans' retirement, and that hasn't changed, but I'm not going to negotiate any deals beyond that, but that's the president's position, and that's the same today as it was earlier this week.
Thanks, Sarah. There's been a number of politicians over the past week, including Chris Christie here at the White House yesterday, who have said that Rob Mueller should step aside from certain investigations within the special counsel. Does the president share those views?
The president wants to see this completed. We think that we are continuing to see day in, day out as this investigation moves to completion, that as the same as it started, there's still no evidence of collusion between the president and anyone. If any collusion took place, it would be between the DNC and the Clintons. And I think we're starting to now see that all of the things that the Democrats had accused this president of doing, they were actually guilty of themselves. And I think that's a really big problem that should be certainly looked at.
Sarah?
Sure.
The lawmakers in Egypt are preparing a measure that would criminalize homosexuality with up to 5 years in prison. Will you condemn the measure?
I'm not aware of the specifics of that, so I'd have to look into that before I could make a response, but we'll certainly be happy to check into it. So.
Thank you, Sarah. At the risk of wasting my question, I'm going to ask you about the Fed. Since the last time you were up here, there have been a couple of reports. One, that the president's going to make an announcement next week. Can you confirm that he's going to make an announcement, and if so, give us a little timing? And then secondly, there have been reports that Chairman Yellen is out of the running and that Jerome Powell is at the top of the list. Can you confirm any of that?
I can confirm that the president plans to make an announcement on that next week, but beyond that, I don't have any other details to add. No.
Yeah. I want to ask you about a comment that Sebastian Gorka made on Fox News. I know that he doesn't work for the White House anymore, but he claims to be very still involved in knowing what's going on here. He was talking about the Uranium One deal and Hillary Clinton and said, if this had happened in the 1950s, there would be people up on treason charges right now. This is the equivalent to what the Rosenbergs did, and those people got the chair. Think about it. Does the president agree with that statement?
I hadn't even seen those comments. I'm not going to comment on Sebastian Gorka or validate that. I can tell you that we do think that there's a lot of cause for concern regarding that deal, and we certainly think it should be looked into, but I can't comment beyond that on somebody outside the administration's comments. Jessica?
Question on the president's upcoming Asia trip. Can you talk a little bit more about the criteria that you use to decide which of the many multilateral meetings that he attended? And can you confirm that he's not going to be at the East Asia Summit and why?
He is participating in, I know, at least the opening ceremony and some of the other parts of that event. In terms of the specifics, we're going to do a full and more detailed briefing on that next week. And so I'll wait till we get to next week because the final details of some of those things are still being worked out. Olivia?
Thanks, Sarah. The president said on Twitter that he congratulated Chinese President Xi on his extraordinary elevation. Does the president have any misgivings either the way that elevation occurred or its potential impact on American interests in Asia?
Not that I'm aware of. No.
Jim? I was wondering, why did the president involve himself in the Uranium One investigation? Are you trying to gin up your own Russia investigation to rival the one up on Capitol Hill? And where is the president's evidence that Hillary Clinton colluded with the Russians, as he tweeted this morning?
In terms of the president being involved, I'm not aware of any specific involvement. The president has pushed for transparency, if that's what you're referring to when dealing with Congress. I know that's probably something new for a president to actually push for transparency, but that's what he's done, and that was the purpose of what he was trying to do in that process.
How about evidence of collusion? That Hillary, Sarah, no, the president made a charge that Hillary Clinton
I think I've addressed that pretty thoroughly. Mike, go ahead.
So you're saying that Hillary Clinton
I'm saying that I'm calling on your colleague.
Okay, well, you didn't really address that question.
The PAC affiliated with Majority Leader, Senate Majority Leader is attacking Steve Bannon. If the White House has an opinion on that, is Mr. Bannon fair game? Is he still viewed as helpful to the president's cause? And has the president had any success talking Steve out of some of the backing him off some of the incumbents, as he suggested in the Rose Garden?
In terms of how a PAC spends their money, I would direct you to them. I'm not going to answer for them any more than I can even answer for the president's PAC, as we don't comment on political situations or contributions from the podium.
Sarah.
Deb.
Hi. Sunday, it's going to be the 1-month anniversary of the Las Vegas shooting, 4 weeks. The shooter enhanced
speed of his fire by using bump stocks. At first, you didn't want to comment on that, but I'm curious to know, does the president think the ATF should prohibit their sale? Is he going to ask them to? Does he think only Congress can do it? Or does he think that bump stocks are not the problem and that there's no need?
He has asked that process be reviewed, and we're waiting on some of the details of that to take place, but a decision hasn't been finalized on that. But we are looking at that and certainly under review. I'm going to cut us a little bit short today, and I have one last announcement that I wanted to make. The president asked me to let all of you know, those of you that have your kids here for trick-or-treating, before they go over to the executive office building for trick-or-treating, he's invited them to come into the Oval. So if you would like to have your kids participate, please meet us here, and we'll walk them over shortly, and then give them back to you so that you can sugar them up and take them home to your house to run wild. Thanks so much, and have a good Friday.
Happy Friday and welcome to the briefing room on ABC. Coming to you from the Washington Bureau of ABC News, I'm John Santucci alongside our senior congressional correspondent Mary Bruce and a face we know, but as a here, special guest, our chief national correspondent Tom Yamas. Great to have you down here.
This is great to be here. It's my first time on the briefing room.
I know.
It's a real honor.
You should be.
The green room is amazing.
Isn't it,
I mean,
though?
You guys really set me up.
Did you get the coffee before you came in?
I did.
Yeah, you
the
did.
Gift bag.
Okay.
Thank you.
It was a good, quick little briefing from Sarah Sanders there on a Friday. A lot of issues happening. Actually, we're going to start, though, with something that you're down here for, which is that very anticipated release of the JFK files yesterday. But not all of the files came out.
It was not all the files. They're still holding back some secret JFK files. The president tweeting out he was so excited about this, and then at the last minute sort of holding back those secret files. It's our understanding that the FBI and the CIA appealed to the White House, basically saying some of those files could put some of our intelligence assets interest in danger. So, for instance, somebody who's a spy possibly still in Cuba, if they release that name, something could happen to that person, and that makes sense. So they're still holding back those documents. But the president tweeted this morning about the JFK files, and he basically said he hopes to put out as much as he can to the public. I think we have that tweet right there. He wrote, "JFK files are being carefully released. In the end, there will be great transparency. It is my hope to get just about everything to the public." But just moments ago, another tweet from Chuck Grassley. Check this one out. This shows like the heat behind this issue. Thanks for Kennedy files release. Ridiculous that the CIA wants to review to redact. I guess that's ye gods. You had 50 years now. CIA wants further cover-up. POTUS stop. So this shows the heat there from people who want all the documents because they believe the conspiracy theories. And we found some documents that don't really necessarily say there was a conspiracy, but they add fuel to the fire. Here's one of them. This is a J. Edgar Hoover memo that he allegedly dictated right after Oswald's killed. And in that memo, he tells someone something issued. Basically, they need something issued so that we can convince the public that Oswald is the real assassin. He was outraged that the Dallas Police Department didn't give more protection because he was right. He thought people would think there was a conspiracy if Oswald was killed that way.
But this whole thing, though, I mean, the fact that listen, this all started, a long time ago. We want to make that
nearly
clear.
54 years ago.
The president obviously, brought this issue up, but this was a deadline they had to hit. That was set back in the early 90s. The release had to happen. But everyone's always had their different theories. This sort of does add fuel to the fire that there is a couple documents out there that we still don't know.
No, definitely. I mean, look, they released 2,800 documents, but there are hundreds, if not thousands, of names. You learn CIA tactics. You learn how they wanted to kill Castro with everything from a poison pen to a wetsuit that had tuberculosis. So when he'd put on the wetsuit, he'd get sick. And then even an exploding seashell, which a seashell that the document outlines would be sunk somewhere, and he would grab the seashell and it would explode. I mean, you think about some of the stories we pitch. Imagine the CIA agents pitching these ideas.
Yeah, that's a GMA
As
news
you've
you
been
could
pouring
use.
over this, though, you've also been finding the links, the extent
Mhm.
to which they followed up every single lead. I mean, some of the things that you've been uncovering in terms of also who they were roping into this. It's pretty remarkable.
Well, that dollar bill you talked about, that was an
And
interesting story you
journalists,
told.
and I mean, all of those details.
No, it's right. I mean, look, we've learned that the Secret Service got a tip that someone had scrawled, "I want to kill the president," or "I want to kill Kennedy" on a dollar bill. This is a dollar bill. It's out in circulation in the country. They located the dollar bill. That's what they say. There was another memo that came out that said that CIA revised a policy in 1976. They say we're no longer going to have contracts with American clergymen or news correspondents. So there were some American news correspondents who were on the take from the CIA and actively working with them. But you're right, there is a common thread, and that one thread is that law enforcement worked so many leads. They really pursued everything. And from reading these documents, you also learn something else, if I can get a little deep here in the briefing room. Just a little deep. You know, conspiracy theorists find it so hard to believe that Lee Harvey Oswald, a single person with just one gun, was able to take out the protected leader of the free world. It's hard to accept that and swallow that. And then you think about Las Vegas, what just happened. A single person killed all those people. And you know, there's conspiracy theories about that too. But we're taught growing up in religion and history that a single person can bring a lot of good. If you accept that, you got to understand a single person can bring a lot of evil, and that's Lee Harvey Oswald.
Clearly.
It's so hard to wrap your mind around.
No,
You're
it
looking
is
for
crazy.
those answers.
Right.
And real quick, and I know you have to get going for world news, but there is a next release coming.
Yeah.
And that deadline is
6
early
months.
next year?
We have 6 months, and the White House just announced yesterday it's going to be a rolling release. They're going to try to release documents as they can. So in 6 months, in April, that's the hard deadline. We hope to have all the documents. But we'll see.
So in 6 months, you're going to be back here pulling
Yeah,
all
maybe.
nighter, meeting every
If
single
I can
document.
get here on the briefing room, you flew me on the private jet. Thank you, John. That
no
was
problem.
great.
Mary's
Gift
expense
bag.
card.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much.
Good to have you
All
here,
right, guys.
friends.
Thank you.
We appreciate that. We do want to keep moving on because there were a couple other issues that Sarah hit in the briefing, and one of them, Mary, this is in your wheelhouse. The Me Too campaign has now hit Capitol Hill.
Yeah.
We usually are. Congresswoman Jackie Spear, really incredible story that she told this morning, and it just moves this conversation now. It's hit media, Hollywood, journalism,
now here.
Capitol Hill.
And she released this video on Twitter this morning. And I don't think really anyone, this is an issue that she's been talking about, but not on such a personal level. And she came out speaking directly to camera, explaining what she experienced many years ago when she was a congressional staffer on the Hill, and explaining the really shocking and horrific story of her chief of staff, she said at the time, who cornered her, tried to kiss her. She says he shoved his tongue down my throat, and she feels that it's so important to share this story so other women, other staffers, other people on Capitol Hill feel that it is safe to come out and speak, because look, we certainly know, you don't have to look that too far back in history to know that there have been, unfortunately, many incidents of sexual harassment, sexual assault on Capitol Hill, but trying to bring this to the forefront of the conversation. I have to say, we've been going through the handbooks, going through the rule books, looking at what is on the books right now, and there really is not a lot.
And
I
what
have to
is
say.
there is quite outdated. And our deputy political director, Mary Alice Parks, has been watching all this. And Mary Alice, let's bring you in for this one here. These rules and regulations and really teaching people about sexual harassment and what it is and the harm it can inflict and how to catch it and how to speak up about it. We've been looking through on Capitol Hill. Not a real lot of HR guidelines up there.
Right, which was part of what the Congresswoman was talking about in her video, really shining a light on the fact that there's sort of old systems in place, old procedures in place for staff members to log complaints, to sort of privately be able to say that there's an issue and speak out. And I think it's important to kind of take a step back, though. Big picture, we know that most American women just are not surprised to hear that this issue is so pervasive, stretching across industries and even into American government. Because I'm reminded of our ABC News poll from just earlier this month that said that more than half of women have experienced inappropriate or unwanted sexual advances, including 3 out of 10 talking about these advances coming from male coworkers. So this is an issue that is clearly pervasive and that women are not surprised to hear more and more stories about.
And it's going to keep coming out, and we are going to keep covering that here on ABC. If you're just joining us, this is the briefing room right here. I'm joined by Mary Bruce, Mary Alice Parks, upstairs with us, joining us today as well. Jonathan Karl, our chief White House correspondent, who is in the briefing room. John, the issue you hit on right at the top of the briefing today from Sarah Sanders, Whitefish, this company that is down in Puerto Rico. A lot of controversy around their contract as to how they got this deal, this arrangement. Not a clear answer, though, from Sarah Sanders today to you, John.
Well, first of all, I think this is a big issue, and I think it's only really just starting to get explored. The issue here, of course, is this company with 2 employees in Montana, very little experience, suddenly getting a $300 million contract to help rebuild the electrical grid in Puerto Rico following Hurricane Maria. I asked if the White House had any concerns about this contract, the way it was awarded. The answer I received was that they're waiting for this audit and then they'll pass judgment. But then I asked as a follow-up, could they tell us definitively that the fact that that the primary financial backer behind Whitefish just happens to be a major donor to the Trump campaign, did that have anything to do with the fact that they got this contract that, on the face of it anyway, they seem entirely unqualified to have to get? So I got the same answer, that this was that they're going to wait for the audit, and that this decision, John, the White House insists, was made entirely at the state and local level, made entirely by the Puerto Rico Electrical Board and local authorities. But I've got to tell you, it is a mystery, John, how a company that small in Montana, of all places, received such a big contract. And one other point on this: there's been a lot of discussion of the fact that the Interior Secretary, Secretary Zinke, happens to be from the same town that this company is from. But I don't know that there's been any connection between the Interior Secretary and this contract. But I will tell you, there's another connection that has not been talked about as much, and that is the fact that this primary financial backer behind Whitefish Energy, this company based in Dallas, has extensive and long-standing ties with the Energy Secretary, with Rick Perry.
Well, that would be two cabinet secretaries there, since obviously you have Ryan Zinke and you have Rick Perry, both serving in the president's cabinet.
And all of those coincidences, shall we say, is not just something that all of us reporters are digging into, but up on Capitol Hill as well, they're looking for answers as to how this company that I believe last year just had 2 full-time employees has now been tasked with this huge contract and a monumental task.
I do want to move on, guys, because there was a whole host of topics we hit there. And John and Mary, both of you, and Mary Alice, been zoning on this as well. The healthcare problem in this country when it comes to dealing with the opioid crisis. The president yesterday declared a public health emergency, not going as far as he could have. And John, we've been looking at this, and you were talking about this earlier on GMA this morning. The White House still asked why they didn't take that extra step.
Yeah, and I think that that there is an explanation. I think that, first of all, what they did is a significant step. It's a public health emergency. This does make it possible for them to reallocate some federal dollars that are already in the pipeline towards battling the opioid crisis. It does allow for some red tape to be cut, for instance, for rural communities to more quickly and easily get drugs to combat addiction. But there is a big question related to this, which isn't whether or not it was a public health emergency or a national emergency. The question is, will the White House ask Congress to put up money to back this initiative? Will they request funds? And the White House has not given a direct answer on this. Sarah Huckabee Sanders was asked this, and she said, "Look, when we tried to get past the repeal of Obamacare, that included $45 billion to fight the opioid crisis. Not a single Democrat supported it." Well, of course not. That was about repealing Obamacare. What they won't say is whether or not they are going to go up and specifically request funds, and if they do, how much will it be?
Well, and John, I think we know someone that may know something about Congress. Oh, good, Mary's here. Hi.
You saw the first reaction from a lot of those same Democrats up on the Hill yesterday. Nancy Pelosi saying, "Show me the money." Look, I think when it comes to the goals of what the president's trying to accomplish here, they're all for it. The question is just whether you have the money to actually achieve those goals. And need we remind our viewers once again of the very lengthy to-do list that Congress is facing? Where does approving funding for this fit? How do you get that money actually allocated?
And get it to happen. All right, but before we wrap, guys, we obviously have a very busy week ahead. A lot of things on the docket here. John Carl, before you head off abroad, what's on the radar for you for next week? What are you watching for?
Well, I hate to jump a little bit ahead of you there, but I'm really looking towards this first trip of the president to Asia as president. He leaves at the end of next week, and this is going to be incredibly interesting to see Donald Trump on the world stage in Asia. He's going to South Korea, Japan, China, the Philippines, Vietnam, and of course the backdrop of all of this is the crisis regarding North Korea. So I am spending a lot of time looking ahead to that one, John.
Mary Alice Parks, what's on the radar for you?
I think that Sarah Sanders made some news there in the press briefing when she said that the president was going to travel to Utah in December. There's been a lot of controversy around whether the White House will approve shrinking some national monuments. It sounds like he's going to visit Bear Ears, so we'll all be watching that. That'll be a big deal if they decide to significantly shrink that national monument. But I want to go back really quickly to the concept. You guys were talking about that big controversy around Puerto Rico. Bear with me, because I'm thinking about Utah, we were talking about Montana, and I think it's important for scope and perspective to remember that there are more Americans without power in Puerto Rico than in all of Montana, and I think probably all of Montana and Utah combined. There are actually there are 2.5 million Americans without power in Puerto Rico. That's more than the population of 16 American states. That was part of the reason that lawmakers were looking at what the issue was and why they came across this kind of fishy contract.
Still a lot of questions about Puerto Rico. You're absolutely right, and I'm glad you mentioned that. Next week
Next
for you.
Next week we are
Can you
finally
believe? Yeah, I know
going...
this week's over. Amazing, right?
It is Friday.
It is, thank God.
Well, next week we're finally going to see a tax bill, it sounds like.
You think so?
I think so.
Wow,
and that's,
okay.
Or at least, we're going to start seeing some more details, shall we say. And there's been certainly
you're already waffling,
much
Mary. It's been 10 seconds of your answer.
Couching. But there certainly has been so much discussion about the importance of this tax bill, about them getting this done. It's do or die for Republicans. Now we're really going to get into the nitty-gritty and see what's in this bill. Can they actually pass this? And can they do it by their very ambitious timeline? Thanksgiving.
Happy Turkey Day. Let's see what happens. Mary Bruce, Mary Alice Parks, John Carl, thanks all for playing. Thank you so much for watching us this week on The Briefing Room. Remember to always tune in to abcnews.com for the latest. I'm John Santucci in Washington. Have a great Friday and a great weekend.